This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Make another smart choice with AutoQuote Explorer to compare rates from multiple car insurance companies all at once. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
Every day, thousands of Comcast engineers and technologists, like Kunle, put people at the heart of everything they create.
In the average household, there are dozens of connected devices. Here in the Comcast family, we're building an integrated in-home Wi-Fi solution for millions of families like my own. It brings people together in meaningful ways.
Kunle and his team are building a Wi-Fi experience that connects 1 billion devices every year. Learn more about how Comcast is redefining the future of connectivity at comcastcorporation.com/Wi-Fi.
The striking visual that I think a lot of people are going to take away from Donald Trump's inauguration yesterday is going to be the seating chart. With the ceremony moved inside and space at a premium, not everyone got a prime seat. Governors were relegated to an overflow room. Tech CEOs, on the other hand, many of them were right up on stage, even in front of the cabinet. All these guys had been in and out of Mar-a-Lago over the last couple of months. The head of Google, the CEO of Apple. Some had displayed their deference to Trump in elaborate ways, the way Mark Zuckerberg announced Facebook is now safe for hate speech. And in the middle of this pack was the founder of Amazon, Jeff Bezos. These days, he might be just as well known as the guy in charge of the Washington Post. Right before the election, Bezos reportedly spiked the Post's endorsement of Donald Trump's opponent, Kamala Harris. It's worth winding the clock back to understand how big of a change this is for the Post. Max Tani, who covers the media for Semafor, he still remembers how Trump's first term seemed to galvanize the writers and editors there.
The Washington Post was one of the news outlets that immediately jumped in on the story of Donald Trump's first term in office. The Post covered all of the ins and outs of the transition and many of the first big moves that the Trump administration made. It boosted subscriptions, it boosted traffic, and it gave the Post a renewed sense of purpose after some years of drift and revenue decline.
I went back and I checked, Max, and my own digital subscription to the Washington Post began January 30th, 2017.
Oh my God.
I was like, oh my gosh, I'm a cliche. This party did not last. Once Trump left office, readers drifted away too. And it's not like the 2024 election brought them back. Writers began heading for the exits. And after that whole endorsement brouhaha, hardly anyone wanted to stick around.
I think the morale inside the Washington Post among staffers who I talk to is probably the worst morale I have seen inside a newsroom in my nearly 10 years of writing and covering the media. The overall sense I get from talking to people is that there is great uncertainty about the business direction of the Post, what the Post's identity is, and how it plans to stop hemorrhaging subscribers and how it plans to gain back online web traffic and audience and relevance in the news media landscape.
While Jeff Bezos has been in town, his Washington Post employees have asked to meet with him. Do you think he's going to do that?
I get no sense at all that Bezos has any sort of desire to meet and engage directly with staff.
Today on the show, as Donald Trump settles into the White House, Washington's hometown paper is imploding. Is Bezos to blame? I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around. This episode is brought to you by Quince. With a new year comes a new opportunity to reimagine yourself. And if you've got a little extra cash, reimagine your wardrobe. This year, resolve to refresh your look with quality pieces and stay on budget with Quince. Quince sent me an adorable shirt and a cashmere sweater, both things I would wear to the office, wear out with friends. They look great, and together they came to under $100. It's pretty impressive, considering that sweater was actual cashmere. So how do they do it? They do it by partnering directly with top factories, cutting out the cost of a middleman, and passing the savings on to you. Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices, and they use premium fabrics and finishes for a luxury feel in every piece. So, if you want to upgrade your closet this year without the upgraded price tag, go to quince.com/whatnext for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/whatnext to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/whatnext.
Planned Parenthood Federation of America exists so that all people can get access to the sexual and reproductive care and education they need to make informed decisions about their health. More than 2 million patients a year rely on the services Planned Parenthood health centers provide, like STI testing and treatment, birth control, gender-affirming care, abortion, cancer screenings, and so much more. Right now, all across the country, reproductive health care and rights are under attack from public officials who are out of step with the will of the vast majority of Americans. The constitutional right to abortion, control of our bodies, and the health care we need has been stolen from us. And now politicians in 47 states, yes, 47, have introduced bills that would block people from getting the sexual and reproductive care they need. Planned Parenthood knows that equitable access to health care, including safe, legal abortion, is a human right. Right now, Planned Parenthood needs your help to protect access to health care. Donate today by visiting plannedparenthood.org/protect.
Okay. I want to kind of just tell the story of how the Washington Post got to this place. And I'll go way back. Like, for years, the Washington Post was owned by the Graham family. But in 2013, they decided to sell. Bezos has said he saved the Post. Is there truth to that?
The Post was a public company, and Bezos bought it and took it private. Not being under pressure from shareholders probably did undoubtedly help the Post. It gave them some breathing room. It gave them room to make mistakes. It gave the paper more room to lose money. You don't have anxious shareholders. You didn't have some other buyer, trying to kind of come over, take it over, and kind of squeeze it in the way that you've seen some other companies do with other major newspaper players. So I think that it's undoubtedly true that he preserved the Washington Post and allowed it to thrive, particularly during the first Trump administration. But on the flip side, the Graham family, I think, expected Bezos to really invest in the Washington Post and to really pour a lot of his massive resources into the paper to help it build a bridge to the digital future. And I think on that score, Bezos has fallen short. It hasn't had the same kinds of digital successes that if you look at the New York Times and the way that they have expanded out their audience via games and via cooking and via the daily, the audio side, I think that the Post has fallen short, and Bezos didn't invest as much, I think, as some people were hoping.
Yeah, it does seem like there were people along the way who just saw problems brewing quietly. Like, one senior editor talked to The Atlantic and basically said, during the Trump years, on the surface, there was no problem at the Washington Post. But actually there was. Our growth was just based on politics. And it meant that we were vulnerable. Like, all of a sudden, if this one thing goes awry, like, we got nothing.
I think the Post is really at a crossroads moment. I think the Post wants to compete with larger media companies, primarily the New York Times, which can weather these ups and downs of interest in national politics. The Post can't. The strongest parts of its journalism are tied to U.S. politics and coverage of Washington. On the other hand, the Post isn't willing to go as far as the hyper DC focused publications like Politico, or on a smaller level like Punchbowl, covering the super minutia of DC, building a business directly aimed at, the members of Congress, their staff, the lobbyists, and folks who want to really read the tea leaves about where Washington is going. The Post still is a bit too broad sometimes for the insiders, but it's too specific for a broad audience and too narrowly focused on Washington for a broad audience. That was a real place where the Post kind of actually failed, and it is partially responsible for the situation that they find themselves in today.
Well, so describe that failure. Like, how much did traffic sink once Trump left office the first time?
There's a lot of different traffic metrics that are floating out there, but I think it's particularly indicative that the Post basically stopped self-reporting its traffic, on its own website around 2022.
Yikes. Looks like you're hiding the numbers.
Well, you're just not bragging about them anymore. That's for sure. I tweeted out a graphic that someone linked to me in recent weeks, in which the daily active users from its peak right around January 6th in 2021 of over 20 million daily active users. By mid 2024, that had fallen to somewhere between 2 and 3 million active users. So it's just a precipitous fall.
That's a tenth of the users?
It's about a seventh, I believe, as somebody pointed out to me. Depending on where you set the marker and how generous you want to be to the Post.
Even as the Post's traffic plummeted, its masthead saw its own controversial shakeups, dominated by one big hire, a new publisher, a guy named Will Lewis. Lewis came to the Washington Post around this time last year. He's a British expat from the Wall Street Journal.
The interesting thing is that people at the Post at the time saw this as a really great win. People thought that Will Lewis had had some success overseeing the Wall Street Journal and helping it build its business. The Journal is one of the most profitable and solid newspaper businesses in the country. That kind of started to shift last year. Will fired the Post's executive editor, Sally Busby. He wasn't pleased with the direction of the paper, and he was displeased at coverage of a scandal that he was involved in when he worked for the Murdochs in the UK. The scandal is incredibly in the weeds. There's questions about whether he was involved in covering up parts of the phone hacking scandal during the 2010s that has been an ongoing, roiling media scandal in the UK for over a decade now. And Post staff were not pleased with perceptions that he did not want the paper to cover this story, even though its reporters felt like it was fair game. I think that started to seed elements of distrust, which, when you couple it with the business problems, I think started to cause a divide between folks in the newsroom and folks at the top.
And then this fall, just before the election, comes this endorsement debacle, where all of a sudden the Post is not endorsing Kamala Harris, even though everyone thought that they were. Can you just explain how this all went down for people who may not remember the details?
Yes, absolutely. And it is a little bit still unclear whether Will Lewis at first Will Lewis, the CEO of the Post, had taken responsibility for the decision, but clearly it was something that, and this was borne out in some of the reporting, clearly it was a decision that Bezos was heavily involved in, and ultimately it was his call not to endorse. After the paper had prepared its endorsement of Kamala Harris, it was no surprise that the editorial board was going to endorse Harris. It's been very, very critical of Donald Trump. Because that decision was made just in the weeks before the election, and just after, as I kind of first reported, that the LA Times made the decision not to make an endorsement by its editorial board. These two things coupled together added to the sense among people in the newsroom and to readers that the billionaire owners of these media organizations were scared of Donald Trump and what regulatory scrutiny he might bring down on the companies and the businesses owned by Patrick Soon-Shiong in the case of the LA Times and Jeff Bezos in the case of the Washington Post.
Or maybe excited for Donald Trump. We don't know.
Right.
But it seemed like to me, for the Washington Post, there was a real price to pay for this endorsement debacle. Like, a lot of people canceled their subscriptions. 200,000? Am I getting that right?
The Post staff, in a memo to Bezos, said it was 300,000 subscribers. The Post itself reported that 250,000 people had said that they were going to cancel. The number is a little bit hazy because a lot of these folks had already paid for a year-long subscription, or some people emailed to cancel and they didn't actually cancel. So it's kind of hard to pin down exactly what the number is. And there's a lot of daily churn that brings subscribers up and down every day. But it was just a massive, massive number of people. And of course, we immediately saw layoffs on the business side of the Post early this year, and those things are not unrelated.
Yeah. And how many writers, editors have sort of walked out the door in the wake of all this?
That was the other major ramification. Journalists, of course, want to work at a place where they feel supported and editorially insulated. A lot of the work that journalists and folks in the media do can come under threat. Many journalists feel that they need to be institutionally protected. And so I think that the idea, that Bezos did not want to take kind of a stand against Trump meant that there might be other editorial places where he would make concessions. And so many started heading for the exits or looking for other jobs. Most of the Post's White House team, many of the star reporters left for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Atlantic, other major news organizations, which is bad for both the Post in the sense that they no longer are reporters for the paper, but also that then they go to directly compete with the Post for at other organizations. And so the Post lost a tremendous amount of talent in just the span of several weeks, as well as laying off 100 staff on the business side, which of course are the people who bring in the money, sell the ads, build the back end stuff that supports the Post's journalism. So that shouldn't be overlooked either.
We'll be right back after a quick break.
This episode is brought to you by NRDC. Our nation's environmental safeguards face their gravest challenge ever. The new Trump administration is moving quickly to dismantle decades of protections for our clean air, water, and public lands. The Natural Resources Defense Council has proved it can stop these attacks. NRDC filed the first environmental lawsuit against the previous Trump administration and maintained a blistering pace, filing 163 legal challenges and winning victories in nearly 90% of resolved cases to protect wolves, bees, and other endangered species, block the Keystone XL pipeline, regulate chemicals hazardous to our health, and more. Now, NRDC is launching the legal fund to stop the Trump agenda. For a limited time, all donations will be doubled to help power their strongest legal defense of our environment yet. From climate protection to endangered species, what we do now will determine the world our children inherit. Make your match gift at nrdc.org/podcast. This episode is brought to you by NRDC. Our nation's environmental safeguards face their gravest challenge ever. The new Trump administration is moving quickly to dismantle decades of protections for our clean air, water, and public lands. The Natural Resources Defense Council has proved it can stop these attacks. NRDC filed the first environmental lawsuit against the previous Trump administration and maintained a blistering pace, filing 163 legal challenges and winning victories in nearly 90% of resolved cases to protect wolves, bees, and other endangered species, block the Keystone XL pipeline, regulate chemicals hazardous to our health, and more. Now, NRDC is launching the legal fund to stop the Trump agenda. For a limited time, all donations will be doubled to help power their strongest legal defense of our environment yet. From climate protection to endangered species, what we do now will determine the world our children inherit. Make your match gift at nrdc.org/podcast.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help you when you need it, so your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states and situations.
So now the Washington Post is in this moment of rebranding, which I guess is not to be unexpected given all of the drama we've just laid out. They've even laid out a new mission statement which is riveting storytelling for all of America.
Well, it's pretty confusing to me. And this is a place where the paper has kind of tried to make a distinction that no one has really followed. Democracy dies in darkness is still the motto of the Washington Post. It changed its mission statement.
So this is like an internal facing statement rather than external?
Yes, and
Uh-huh.
it's kind of both. The reality is that the Post is trying to distance itself from democracy dies in darkness without getting rid of the slogan explicitly, because it's seen the ways in which its subscriber base, the people who pay for it every month, many of whom subscribed because of that slogan, they've seen that they're willing to punish the Post if they look like they're running away from that mission, as we saw with the 250 to 300,000 subscribers who left after the non-endorsement. The new mission statement clearly is meant to signal that the Post wants to appeal to the broadest number of people. It doesn't want a highly specialized or highly ideological, set of readers and audiences. And I think that is a real gamble, because as we've seen, most media is fragmenting. Audiences are hyper-specific about the types of content that they want. And so broad is a risk.
It's an old school play. And Jeff Bezos has made comments that support where this mission statement is going, talking about how the Post, he wants it to be read by people all over the country and be read by more blue-collar Americans. He sort of nods to, we need more conservative readers. And it was interesting to kind of see this commentary, just because Jeff Bezos owned the Post during the first Trump administration. And a lot of journalistic outlets had these same ideas back during Trump 1.0. But this seems to be now the first time we're hearing it from Bezos. Is that right? Am I getting that right? Or am I just misremembering?
Well, one of the interesting things is that it's been reported that Bezos has been told by powerful people on the right that he has a Washington Post problem, and that clearly, even though Bezos is not involved with the editorial of the Post, and indeed the editorial of the Post has been quite hard on Bezos at times. It's done reporting on Amazon and his companies, and it's been fairly unsparing. In the minds of many people in the Trump administration, the Post is owned by Bezos, and therefore he has a say over what goes on there. And I think clearly during the first administration, he was willing to put up with it and take the heat. He wasn't alone. There were many other media organizations and institutions and even companies that were willing to stand up and push themselves away from Trump. Clearly, this time he's trying a different tactic, and he wants to move the paper in a different direction. It remains to be seen whether it'll work out or not, but I think it's incredibly telling that not only did he not endorse, but that he was in attendance at multiple inauguration activities and is online tweeting with Elon Musk about how they're BFFs. It's a fascinating transformation.
Yeah. I mean, there's also reporting last week that one of the big goals laid out by Washington Post leadership was to reach 200 million paying users. Does any journalistic outfit have that kind of paying user base? What kind of goal is that?
I think Spotify is a company that has tens of millions of users who subscribe.
Amazon Prime, maybe.
Netflix. The reality is that no news media organization even comes close. The Times last reported subscriber figures are somewhere between 10 and 11 million paying subscribers, which is obviously amazing. The Post's paying subscriber number hasn't been reported in several years, but at its peak around 2020, it was hovering around 3 million subscribers. So the idea that it would reach 200 million paying users, which is a kind of a funny term, and I think clearly not everybody would be paying directly for it. It still is an incredibly lofty goal, and I legitimately don't understand how you could get to that. 20 million would be ambitious. 200 million seems like someone added on an extra zero by accident.
I want to sit back just a little bit because you're an interesting thinker on all things media. The media is entering this second Trump presidency in such a different state than it did in 2017. We talked about that. Back in Donald Trump's first term, he was this rallying cry for journalists, and he was also a revenue driver. Now, is Donald Trump either of those things?
I think it's still an open question. I think that clearly there is not the same type of audience appetite, particularly among people who feel horrified by Donald Trump. It is clear. You see it in the television ratings. You see it in the subscriber numbers. You see it in traffic. People are less tuned in, particularly those who feel upset by Donald Trump's conduct in his politics and his continued popularity and his success in last year's election. That's without a doubt true. The question for me is, as he takes office and as he starts actually implementing his policies again, and now that it's not just, oh, Trump said something crazy, it's actual policy that affects people's lives, will people engage again? Will they tune back in? While a lot of people still rely on the news media and it still drives the conversation in Washington and throughout the country and on many of the biggest stories and changes and things that are impacting our lives, the news media is clearly diminished in its importance as a part of people's media diets. People are finding their news in different places. They're not tuning into the evening news at the same rates that they were, or watching cable news. They're not subscribing to newspapers at the levels that they used to. They're getting their information through podcasters and YouTubers. And in some ways, that's great. There are shows like this one that are incredibly informative and interesting, and probably wouldn't exist as a part of a legacy media institution. But I think that it raises real questions for us, and it poses a real challenge to us in the news media about how we continue to be relevant in people's lives and reach people and give them true and fair information. We have to be better at reaching people, and it's an open question about how that happens.
Max, I'm really grateful for your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me back.
Maxwell Tani is a journalist covering the media for Semafor. And that's our show. What Next is produced by Paige Osburn, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Madeline Ducharme, and Anna Phillips. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary Harris. Thanks for listening. Catch you back here next time.